Good morning and welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. My name's Eric. I live in South Georgia, Zone 8B. In today's video, I wanted to start with showing you guys what I've been harvesting this week, what I've been eating fresh, and I'm also going to do a full garden tour today. There's lots going on in the gardens. And what I wanted to talk today about in a little more in depth is how I decide what I'm going to plant. I want to talk about how I choose both what crops I'm going to grow and what goes into my decision making as far as the varieties that I choose. Okay, so let's get started here. Um, the big news this week is I harvested all my potatoes. Um, you guys can see here, I grew both Yukon Gold potatoes this year and red potatoes. Um, so some final numbers, I planted 4 20-foot rows of potatoes. Each row I planted 5 pounds of seed potatoes. So I planted about 20 pounds of seed potatoes, and each row yielded between 30 and 40 pounds of potatoes. So total harvest, I ended up with somewhere between 120 and 150 pounds of potatoes. So I'm super happy with the harvest. It was a very successful year. Um, I've already eaten a lot of these Yukon Golds, and I've given a lot away. These are the red potatoes. As far as comparing the two varieties, the the red potato plants definitely produced more potatoes. They were much more prolific, but last year I only grew red potatoes. This year I tried the Yukon Golds, and I'm happy I did. It was fun to grow them. They just didn't produce quite as many potatoes, but I'm not complaining. I've got, more than enough. Um, some real nice ones here. This is probably one of my biggest reds. You look over here, there's a real nice Yukon. So yeah, super excited about my potato harvest this year. Um, and this week I've also been continuing to harvest lots of green onions or scallions. And my cucumbers are starting to come in. I got a bunch of cucumbers this week. I talked to you guys in an earlier video this week. This isn't my best yellow squash season. It hasn't worked out real well for me, but that's okay. I am starting to get just a couple squash, and hey, that's all that matters. I'm having fun doing it, so that's what I've been harvesting and eating fresh this week. I can show you guys over here in my kitchen garden. This is my Italian basil. I'm also harvesting herbs. This time of year, I'm using fresh herbs with most everything I cook. My scallions are still holding on in the heat. I thought they might have been zapped by now, but they're still kind of holding on. I've got some mint over in this area. The other thing I wanted to mention, showing you guys over here in my kitchen garden, as far as my flowers, I, I've never been a huge flower guy. They are nice to look at, but I will say the main reason I grow flowers is to attract bees to my garden. I learned very early on how important bees are to growing vegetables, especially the stuff that you're growing in the summertime. Your summer squash, your tomatoes, um, all these things need bees for pollination. So that's the main reason I grow or try to always have flowers growing in my backyard, is to attract bees. And they are very, nice to look at. It a lot of color to the backyard. If you guys hold on a second, I can hear one of my dogs. Norman is kind of letting me know that he wants to come outside. So I'm just going to walk back this way and let him out. He probably just wants to say hello to everybody. Okay. So, as I walk over to show you guys the gardens, I wanted to talk about how I decide what I'm going to grow. And the first big reason, or the thing that the first main factor is, you always obviously want to grow what you enjoy eating. You don't want to grow stuff that you're not going to eat. So first and foremost, I grow things, tomatoes, peppers, summer squash, cucumbers. That's my first and main reason for doing all this, is for the harvest and to use the produce in my recipes and have good, healthy, fresh food. So that's the first factor that goes into what I decide to plant. Now, if we look over here, this is where my potatoes were growing. Hey, Mabes. So what I did this weekend, yesterday, I dug out all my potatoes. You can see this garden bed is now empty. And what I did is, you can see, I kind of, where the rows of potatoes were grown, I have the dirt kind of mounded up here. And the reason for that is, what I'm going to plant next over here are sweet potatoes. And they grow a little bit different, or you plant them a little bit different than regular potatoes. Regular potatoes you plant very deep in the ground, and as the plants grow, you hill up the dirt and bury the plants as they grow. So you bring up dirt throughout the growing season. Sweet potatoes benefit from being planted directly into these mounds. So I've kind of built up the soil and created these little hills. And that's where I will plant 3 20-foot rows of sweet potatoes. I added a lot of compost into these rows and mounted them up. So this garden is 100% ready to plant. And next weekend, I will be planting my sweet potatoes. Some other things that I have going on over here, I told you guys in a previous video, on this end of the garden, I have my Cherokee Tan pumpkin seeds planted. And as of this morning, they've just started to germinate. So that right there is what you like to see. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 of my seeds that have germinated. And these plants are very vigorous. They grow on really long vines. I've talked about what I will do is I will train these vines to grow around the perimeter of this garden bed. This garden bed is 15 feet wide, or 15 by 25 feet. And these pumpkin vines will grow around the perimeter, and I'm not exaggerating. They will grow all the way to the back corners of the bed. They will continue to grow probably out close to my fence. They're just amazing. And they just get loaded down with Cherokee Tan pumpkins. Also over here, I have a full row of okra planted. The variety of okra I plant is called Clemson Spineless. I have about a 20-foot row here planted, and I have 12 plants growing. So super excited to get some okra in the ground. And lastly, over here where you see this string, I planted another crop, and I'm gonna kind of wait to let you guys know what I have planted here. Maybe if you have a guess, you could leave it in the comment section. But I have a double row planted here on this side where the string is, and I've never grown this crop before. I planted seeds, so I'm kind of waiting to make sure that the seeds germinate before I really start talking about this crop. But I'll give you guys one clue. A couple clues. First, I've never planted this before. And secondly, it's actually not a crop that I will ever eat. So maybe you guys can try to guess what I planted there. I'm planting it in, middle of May, so this is a crop that really likes the heat. And it will also grow, like I say, the okra in this crop grows pretty tall. So these pumpkin vines will basically just start to work their way down through that stretch. So hey Mabel, why don't you get out of there? Come on, Mabes. Come on, get out of there. So that's this side of the garden where the potatoes were. So like I say, the next step was next weekend I will plant my sweet potatoes here, and I am going to grow 3 different varieties of sweet potatoes this year. So super excited about that. Now we can come over here to the main garden space, and the next factor that comes into play that guides my decision making as far as what I'm going to plant is, I'm trying to think how to describe this best. If you think about the final vegetable that you're trying to grow, I find it much easier to grow things that end up being smaller at maturity than larger. For example, what I mean by that is a cherry tomato is, in my opinion, a lot easier to grow than a big, large slicing tomato. A smaller pickling cucumber is a lot easier to grow than a large slicing cucumber. In other words, the reason that is, peppers are another good example. Small chili peppers, whether they're hot peppers or small sweet peppers, are a lot easier to grow than big bell peppers. And the reason that is because it's the length of time that it takes to get to maturity. The longer it takes for the fruit to ripen and to get large and to get mature, the longer that takes, that's just more time that things could go wrong. Whether it be a really, really strong storm that comes through and knocks your plant over, whether it's disease, it's more time for diseases to set into the garden. So that's the main reason I grow pickling cucumbers. I just think they're easier to grow. As far as tomatoes, I didn't even try to grow large slicing tomatoes until my 3rd year here. The first couple years, I only grew cherry tomatoes. So I always recommend to beginning gardeners, just think about that. I would never discourage anyone from trying to grow anything. But just keep in mind, if you're an absolute beginner, you might want to start with like cherry tomatoes instead of trying to grow a huge heirloom, slicing or a beefsteak style tomato. So that's another factor that goes into my decision making as far as what I like to plant. So as far as continuing with the tour today, I'm not going to talk much about those 2 tomatoes back there because I have those same varieties growing over here that I can talk about a little bit later. But you can see my summer squash are still flowering and they're holding on. I've talked about my struggles with my yellow squash this year, but they seem to be doing okay. And I actually harvested a couple squash this week. Now, if we continue over here, these next 3 rows are my determinate tomatoes. I have 16 tomato plants here. I started with 3 rows of 6, so I started with 18 plants, but I did have 2 plants right in this area here die. I talked about that in an earlier video, but luckily the rest of these plants seem to be doing fine. I've got lots of flowers forming up top here. I'm starting to see some small tomatoes forming. You can see right there. So it's just, you know, just a couple more weeks, I'll probably really start to see a lot more tomatoes on these plants. Later today, I do have to run another run of string to help support these plants. If you look over here, what can happen, the lighting's not too good with this video, but I've got, if you can see here, see how this branch is kind of out here? What I'll do later today is I'll run some string and pull this branch into the plant. So that's on my list of things to do today, is to add one more run of string up my, you know, Florida weave trellising system or support system for these determinate tomatoes, but they're all doing good. Now, this next row, at the end here, I have 3 tomato plants. This is also a determinate variety. It's called Carolina Gold, and these are doing amazing. These plants, I can't get over how many tomatoes are in here. It's hard to show you guys all because the leaves are so dense, but these plants are just loaded with tomatoes. Super happy with these. You can see this middle plant, there's so many tomatoes on it that it's actually starting to kind of tip the cage over. I might have to come in later today and put some wooden stakes on the inside of these cages to help support the weight of these plants because there's so many tomatoes on there. But super happy with this variety. I never grew this variety before, but so far so good. The one thing I have noticed is I talk about the density of the leaves. They're just such a dense plant, but they are just loaded with tomatoes. Now, right here, these are my 3 eggplant. The variety is called Black Beauty. It's the standard eggplant. I have struggled growing eggplant in the past. It's not my best crop, but these plants seem to be doing good. They've got lots of flowers on them. I just haven't seen any actual eggplants yet, but they seem to be growing well, and we'll just wait on those. The good thing about eggplant is they love the heat, so if they don't produce right away, that's okay because they'll make it right through the summertime. Now, if we continue down this row, next I have 3 poblano peppers growing, and I'm actually going to sneak around the other side of the garden here. We can walk right through here. I think I can get a better angle at it from over here. But these are my 3 poblano peppers. These are the ones I talked about that get real tall. You can see how tall these plants are already. These are a 5-foot tomato cage, and the peppers are already, you know, almost to the top. So they grow real tall. They tend to produce a little bit later in the season, so I don't see any peppers yet, but it's just a matter of time with those. Now, on the back side of this row, these are my 2 sweet banana peppers, and these are really starting to produce fruits. If you look down here at this one, you can see there's lots of banana peppers forming. This plant And you can see how many peppers grow on these plants. So that's, you know, I only planted 2, but you can see, you know, they just produce so many peppers. It's really all you need. So they're doing really well. Then these next 3 plants right here, these are my jalapeno peppers. They're really sturdy. The stems are real healthy. So I haven't even had to really trellis them yet or put any string on them. So they're doing real well. And I'm starting to get some jalapeno peppers forming. You can see right there. So pretty soon I'll be harvesting a lot of peppers. Then over on this far end of the garden, these are my indeterminate tomato plants. You can see how tall these plants are getting. I have some slicing tomatoes in this area. This is also where my cherry tomatoes are growing. If we look right down here, this variety is called Juliet's Hybrid, but you can see lots of clusters of awesome looking tomatoes are growing on this plant. Really excited about that. Another variety of cherry tomato I'm growing is called Yellow Pear. I apologize for the lighting and the quality of the video. I'm trying to get in here to show you guys, but you can see, you know, there's some yellow clusters of yellow pear cherry tomatoes forming. Really happy with these plants. You can see the size of them. I mean, this plant right here, for example, is about 1 foot over the top of the cage. I mean, I'm 6'3", and this plant is at about my shoulders, but that's normal for these indeterminates. They just grow and grow and grow. I'll show you guys these plants. So this end row over here are my cherry tomatoes. But if you look at this next row, I've got some slicing tomatoes growing in here, and these are doing real well. I'll get down here to show you some of the tomato clusters forming. But you can see on this plant, there's a nice cluster of tomatoes. If you come over here, there's some tomatoes forming, some more up above. This plant over on this side here, you can see just lots of fruit. So really happy with my tomatoes. And lastly, I just wanted to show you kind of my pride and joy of the garden this year. This is my cucumber trellis. You can see it's just growing real nicely. I just love how the vines grow on this trellis. You can see right here how the cucumbers just kind of hang as opposed to laying on the ground. This way of growing cucumbers is just so much better. The plants are so much healthier. So yeah, that's a tour of the garden. I'm gonna wrap it up for today. It's getting pretty hot out here and I got a lot of work to do in the garden. So I just wanted to thank you as always for joining me. I hope you got something out of today's video. I will talk in the future a little bit more about some more what goes into my decision making as far as my varieties. I also try to look for plants that have disease resistance. But anyway, I just want to thank you guys for joining me, and until next time, this is Southern Tier Gardening.